Do is I'm going to go through a couple of slides. I know, try not to do much PowerPoint, but I want to set a little bit of context. What I had attempted to do as we were going through that polling, I thought, what a great idea, because some of what I'm going to show you will be some statistics, and so maybe I'll just ask for a raise of hands to ask some of these. I tried doing it, I figured that I would hear fumble with my phone doing that, and we probably wouldn't get a lot of value out of it. So, the first challenge is the enter key. All right. So. First off, in the interesting role that I have right now, as it was mentioned, I work with industry solutions. In the last couple of years, I've worked with a solution we call projects-driven supply chain, which is really the integration of project management and the integration tying back to supply chain. And so because of that, and I work across the different groups and everything, one of the things I find is that some statistics are very consistent regardless who I talk to. And one of which is 65% of mega projects fail to meet their original objectives. It's interesting because projects really have two objectives: delivering on time and on budget. And of that, most projects don't really meet that objective. So I just want to maybe raise a hand. I do the poll thing, but it didn't work out. Is this about right? About right? Okay. So it's somewhat consistent. It's this is the objective. The objective is just to be able to improve upon that number. And so if we think about some of the reasons that occurs, so I actually reached back to PMI, the Project Management Institute, looked at a few statistics, and they actually do surveys every year. And what's really interesting when you look at this is that poor communications creates a big challenge. You're basically 1 out of over 5 projects unsuccessful, so 20% is unsuccessful because of poor communications. But what's really interesting when you look at this and you look at this year's, and these are statistics from last year, it actually continues the same, but it actually breaks everybody into two groups. Those that do really well are improving. So those that actually look at themselves and say, I'm good at communication, they continue to do better, and yet the vast majority in the other category continue to suffer. So what's interesting is that those that actually initiate very good, strong practices seem to do continually improvements. So one of the reasons for this that we see here is really these business silos. So when you look at the project management function and you look across that and the sorry. I thought I was making it squeal. Maybe this one works. There's like 8 microphones up here. But one of the I don't think so. Can you guys hear me okay? Yeah. Okay, I can talk a little louder if you like. But one of the challenges is, if you look at the project management function, the supply chain function, they actually use basically different terminology. They have different metrics. They have a lot of different challenges. So project manager will talk about work breakdown structure. They'll talk about activities, tasks, and if they're talking to a materials person, the materials person's really talking about things like just in time. I want to be able to do MRP, netting, pegging, and these terminologies are different. The other big challenge is on the supply chain side. They use a concept called exception management, which is unheard of in project side. So this is where one of the challenges, and because of it, their mechanism of communications are normally manual. A lot of spreadsheets, a lot of basically if they're using project management tools, they're independent tools, and a lot of phone calls. So, critical to success, organizations report that only 1 out of 5 organizations report having an effective change management process. So once you have the project, again, sounds like it's working. So now I'll tone it down. One of the challenges is once you have that initial project and you set it up, there's all sorts of worldwide conditions that actually occur as you're progressing along. And how do you manage that in order to make sure that you're effectively execute on your project and it doesn't create problems for you? So this is another big area. The other one is if I start out with the wrong foundation, then of course the project's probably going to fail, right? I won't meet my initial objectives if my quoting or my estimating or the mechanism for defining what that project parameter should be are incorrect. So is this a challenge for everybody? I wish I had the little poll numbers. So one of the things that we did is we looked across the project lifecycle. And again, this is interesting because across all industries, even though I may look at a couple of these chevrons, they might be slightly different, the reality is they're actually quite similar across the board. And there are, for large complex projects, there are dependencies on the supply chain for the project's success that go along. So in the estimation phase, as an example, in many instances, I'll identify based upon basically some key key products to identify what my constraints are, because I don't necessarily have the tools available to drill down into the supply chain to identify what my real constraints are and be able to go through. So a lot of the estimates are very, very brief and actually in many instances not very effective, and that seems to be consistent. On the design and engineering phase, if I have design or engineering issues and I run into challenges, then that of course impacts my schedule. So the opportunity to tie these together is an important component. And of course all of the other elements too. So there's lots of dependencies, and this is really what we attempted to work through, is try to identify how do we interlink throughout the project life cycle, the project dependencies to tie them together so that we would have more effective project scheduling. So with that, a couple of things, projects, of course, one of the reasons is projects can be complex. I'm really only focused on that schedule, scope, and cost, but when I think about change management, milestones, simulations, profitability targets, lots of different things can potentially impact my ability to deliver. So to summarize, there was an article in the Wall Street Journal on Friday that I thought was quite interesting. And it talked about, of course, another one of those doomsday articles that talked about everything that's happening in the industry right now. But there were some quotes that the author had gathered that I thought were interesting that would set context for what we want to talk about today. So the first off from Schlumberger, I think we can simplify, we can standardize, we can engineer costs out of the system. So a critical component, when you're dealing with projects, of course, that's something that you want to be able to think through that creates some challenges. It's a battle because it really requires a lot of change, and of course something that's necessary. So hopefully we'll get some of that out of the session today. And then we believe there'll be even bigger savings in the long run. So it might be some short-term pain, but activities I want to be able to engage in. And the tough times require the oil industry to think and work in a different way. And actually that's the way I want to set the context for the first questions I'll ask. So let me introduce our panelists, and what we'll do is I have a few questions, all of which require glasses to read. We have a couple of questions that we'll ask, and then we'll open up to the audience and see how it goes. So first off, I'd like to introduce Thomas Nessel. He's the Director of Global Quality and Business Excellence at FMC Technology. I'm honored to be with him. He's had over 20 years of a combined experience in supply chain operations in both the oil and gas and then automotive OEM industries. He's had a solid record of success, leads quality transformation, continuous improvement initiatives with the ability to obtain buy-in at all organization levels, while continuously meeting or exceeding corporate business objectives as well as regulatory and industry standards. He has international experience operating successfully in a number of different countries, leading large, diverse, and multicultural teams in highly complex matrix organizations. Of course, we see that across the board now, right? That becomes a real requirement. He's a leader, motivator, coach, development, and implementation of zero defect and quality culture. And I'd also like to introduce Abhijit Bhandari, and he's the client CEO of GE Oil and Gas. He's been with GE for over 10 years. In his current role, he's the CIO leading the IT strategy for a business unit in the GE Oil and Gas located in Houston. And as part of this role, he leads a global team to drive the IT strategy and execution around ERP rollouts, automation in factory shops, commercial excellence, field service and digitation. And he joined GE in Oil and Gas in 2012 as the supply chain IT leader for drilling and surface, and focused on driving supply chain automation across the key manufacturing plants. Prior to joining GE Oil and Gas, he actually began his career in the GE Healthcare. And he progressed through his career at GE by taking a broader IT roles in manufacturing, supply chain distribution, and before joining Oil and Gas, he was the global parts and repair solution IT leader and managed the global warehouse and logistics platform for over 80 sites globally. He has a bachelor's degree in information technology from Mumbai University and a master's in computer science from Loyola. So with that, what I'd like to do is, taking upon that experience, is start with a question. As you know, both of you have, well, first off, thank you for joining me. If we can get a round of applause for both of you have a pretty diversified background. I think, Thomas, you worked with GM for quite a while, and Abhijit, you worked in GE for the majority of your career, but in the healthcare and other industries. And what's this industry, in many instances, sometimes seems to be a little insular, where it's difficult to take concepts from a lot of different industries. And what I guess the first question I'd like to ask is, based upon your experience in working in other industries, especially as it relates to projects. How have you been able to take some of those learnings, and then how readily accessible and adoptable are they within the environments you're working now? Thomas, you want to start?
Yeah, good morning. I think that most of the principles that we do see in other industries are absolutely applicable to the oil and gas industry as well. I think there is a cultural element. This industry is risk adverse. They have the more traditional thinking. And one of the challenges that I came across over the past 6 years is that there is a belief out there that every project is very unique and absolutely different from the previous project. And because of that, there is no opportunity for standardization, for utilization of best practices. And if you start to talk about lean concepts and operational excellence, you quite quickly run into barriers to convince the organization and the customer, and to some extent the supply chain as well, to engage in that conversation and to really identify the opportunities of making things more flawlessly. I also believe that this current downturn is a enabler and probably an accelerator of that journey. And although we have made good progress over the course of the last 5-6 years, I can only echo what has been said on the previous panel. We are still in the starting block on our journey.
Thank you. Abhishek?
So within GE, we have these councils, right? So, we land up talking to folks from power and water, we talk to folks from aviation. And a few years ago, there was a council that I was leading, and one of the questions was, how can we get better at project execution? And the first inputs from everyone was, hey, look, we've got our projects that we do in oil and gas versus what we do in aviation versus in healthcare. They're all different. So we said, okay, we agree to disagree. Let's move on to the next point. What are some of the challenges? And as we started to enlist all these challenges, we saw a striking similarity, right? Between, okay, hey, I'm overestimating my schedule. I'm not getting what I need from manufacturing. My suppliers are late. So there was a striking similarity in some of the challenges that we were facing. And about the same time, our leadership met together and they defined what we now call as the digital thread for General Electric. Basically what happens is folks like us in IT, we get to work with the project managers, we get to work with the materials managers, we get to work with sourcing. So we are in a unique position. We see the end-to-end value chain, the communication gaps, the business silos that exist, right? And the concept of digital thread is how do we bust these silos and tie them together through an innovative technology-based solution, right? So we start off with what we call as the virtual manufacturing. This is where our engineering team will build 3D models and actually pass them through a virtual manufacturing environment to see if the models will pass or are they going to fail. That is going to help us reduce our cost of quality. The second step of standardization is around factory optimization. So within the factory, what are some of the things that we can do? Can we connect the two factories that are miles away together through a systemic interface? That ways I know what is the capacity at one factory versus the other. The third one is more got to do with optimization around the machines, what we refer to as sensor enabled. More than often, some of these machines that we have across the industries, they have common sensors, so we can read data from them to understand how better are they being utilized, and then actually publish the data up to the project management layer to let them know that, hey, look, this plant has a little bit more capacity, so let's route the orders out there, right? And then to end with, we have what we call as the end-to-end brilliant factory design, right? So if we implement these design, and we have just started our path, right? But the thought process is we implement this framework across all our divisions of healthcare, GE oil and gas, and then present it on a layer that everyone within GE can use, right? So the company is moving more towards standardization. What can we learn from each other's, from different divisions of GE, and come together with a common solution rather than making an industry-specific solution.
That's great. Thank you. I'd like to actually build upon maybe both of those comments. I think, Thomas, you mentioned a little bit that coming into it from other industries in order to initiate lean principles and such, and it's difficult, right, because of the project's nature of this. And I think obviously you talked a little bit about what GE is doing in order to standardize some of those overall processes. But when I look at a project itself, project in of itself, I mean, is a project. And because a project is a project is unique. And I got to believe that there's some challenges associated with kind of transitioning a unique project to some standardization. And so what about the concept of the project itself and managing that? How, maybe Thomas, if you could start with how.
Yeah, I think, in our cultural transformation, what we have learned is that most of the time it boils down to understanding the requirements or the lack of understanding requirements. And it's a very complex subject, to truly mutually understand and agree on a requirement, because you have many stakeholders involved in that conversation. The customer, is basically providing you a set of objectives, a scope, and a lot of requirements that you need to basically, execute through your organization and your supply chain. And then we have a lot of communication, between the customer and us, internally, between the different functional areas, and that reaches into our supply chain. And what we have learned over the years is that we are not very good in making sure that we truly understand what the requirements are. So that there is a belief that we do understand, but there is a lot of guesswork being applied to the business, which then has a degraded impact on how well we can execute a project. So we really need to take it down to the basics and really focus on what are the requirements. Do we mutually understand? Are we even looking at these requirements from the same framework? Or are we just looking at that from our own perspective, from our own frame? And when we do that, we create something that we call requirements management. We have clarity, and clarity leads to better planning, and better planning leads to better project execution. Now, what we do not have today is what he talked about. We don't have a CIO. We just hired one. He started Monday. we identified that as a gap in our current execution. We don't have well integrated IT systems. We have functional requirements, we have functional strategies, but again, they have been developed in a silo kind of mentality. They are corresponding to an issue, a problem, where the function needs a solution to, but they are not integrated and they are not well interlinked. And I believe that for us needs to be the next natural step. After getting better in requirements management, how do we enable an IT structure, systems and tools that are fully interconnected and help the execution of a project?
No, I would agree to what Thomas was saying, right? It's about getting the basics right when it comes to the lifespan of a project. And if you really take a step back, right, we looked at a study from E&Y a few years ago, and according to them, about 60% of the project failures are related to the softer aspects of an organization. People, culture, and some of the things that we were posting online this morning. The remaining 20% is more focused around change management processes, right? And the last 10% was got to do with external factors, government regulations, war-like situations, something that we really can't do much about. But if we really look at what we can control, right, the 60%. So what we have done within GE Oil and Gas is we have defined an organization for project management. It's called the GPQ organization, Global Projects and Quality. So that way we have centralized the way we manage and execute projects across all our subdivisions. What that gives us is a standard framework, right? We don't have business units. And earlier we used to have this challenge where business units would come up with their own innovative ways of managing projects, and more than likely those innovative ways were not very innovative. So kind of driving that standardization through the centralized organization has helped a lot. And then in addition to that, we have standardized from an IT perspective, we are standardizing the toolkits. How do we manage a project? So we use Primavera to manage all our projects, but that's not it, right? We've got to connect the project management tools to the supply chain systems. So now I have a common source of truth. I don't have to rely on people sending emails or a project manager saying I'm okay, or a manufacturing materials manager saying, yeah, I'm going to get the material soon, right? Those kind of terminologies doesn't exist in project execution or delivery. And if you do have them, that means your project is not necessarily on schedule. So that's the first part of it, right? And we are getting better at it slowly and steadily. The next 20% is got to do more with change management. And we quickly realized, right, some of the projects we execute, we have a high dependency on our customers. So how do we actually bridge the gap with our customers? How do we collaborate better with them? Especially, and these are small and little things, right? Customer needs to come for a pressure testing, okay? Unless and until the pressure testing is done, I cannot proceed on this project. So how do we figure this out, right? We try to get the customer. Now pressure testing can happen only in a location, say Singapore, right? Hydro testing happens in Singapore. So if a customer has to be in Singapore, if it's a Middle Eastern customer, I've got to make sure that they have the visas for it. So these are some of the logistical challenges that we start realizing that, you know, hey, I can't beat up my manufacturing guys for that, neither can I beat up my project managers. I need to be in a position to better collaborate with my end customer. So we have come up with the solution, we call it Unifier, where we share some of these milestones. We share quality documents where a customer can come in and check and say, okay, hey, look, this is good. I approve this, and you know, hey, this is the next upcoming milestone. We need you here. So those are the collaboration kind of issues that we are trying to come up with solutions to iron them out. You necessarily cannot resolve all of them. There are always unknowns in a project that can't do much about. But defining that standard process, standard toolkits, centralizing the execution, and then working very closely with our customers. I think those are some of the areas, John, that I can think of that will enable better project delivery and execution.
Sure, thank you. What I'm going to do is ask one more question, then we'll open it up to the audience. And so if you could think for a moment and get those microphones ready. Thomas, we'll start with you again. And one of the things that we saw in that Project Management Institute when they did the survey, they recognize communications as being one of the biggest challenges to basically delivering projects on time. So maybe what are some of the things, well, first off, do you believe that that's a big challenge? And second, what are some of the challenges related to that, and how are you able to overcome some of them?
Yeah, I agree that this is one of the biggest challenges, and it goes back to what I talked about on requirements management. These days we talk a lot about collaboration. We have a value within our company that talks about collaboration, and we share that values with our suppliers and with our customers, and we need to really learn to understand what we mean by collaboration, because collaboration is more than communication. It's a dialogue. It's not a monologue. It goes two ways, and it's really at the heart is, do we understand what the requirements are, and how do we basically move that through the value chain? The lack of integration, and what I hear from my colleague here, they are ahead of the game if I compare to our own current state, is giving us a lot of challenges. You run interviews internally with your project execution organization, with your aftermarket organization, with your manufacturing organization, to ask, how do you communicate? And they all say, oh yeah, we communicate a lot. Oh, we have emails, we have telephone, we send letters, but we don't really
we have lunch.
utilize, yeah, we have lunch together, but we don't really utilize the system in a professional manner in order to help us to execute the project more flawlessly. And I think that is really the next step on the journey where we really need to invest and integrate these systems in an intelligent manner. And interestingly enough, I mean, if I go a little bit back, and it's not too much back, 5 years, it was the customer that was dictating where we're going to purchase certain equipment. So there was not even a supply chain strategy in play. Now we have a supply chain strategy, and the customers are starting to see the benefits, and they're starting to buy into the concept. Now we need to step up on the tools. We don't have a portal for our supply chain. We are basically dealing with them on a one-on-one, by telephone, email, which adds a lot of risk to the business, adds a lot of risk to the project execution, because there is no traceability. You always depend on individuals and what they have agreed up to, and it's not linked back into the planning system. And also, we use Primavera. I believe we could use Primavera in a deeper way.
No, look, I agree, John. Look, but I like the way Thomas put it. Right, it's not communication; it's collaboration. Communication often gets misinterpreted as one-way traffic. Right, I think collaboration is a better way to put it, and I 100% agree. That's probably one of our bigger challenges that even we are facing within the company. And if you think about collaboration, right, it's internal as well as external. External is what I was referring to with the customer. Internal collaboration would be, the way I look at it is, it's a top-down and a bottoms-up approach, right? Top-down is when you define a project plan, it gets published that, hey, look, this is the milestone, this is what we're going to follow. And bottoms-up is when you work with your sourcing teams, your manufacturing teams, and these are some basic elements, guys. This is not fancy stuff, right? This is like as simple as putting a lead time on some of your buy items, defining a good router, a manufacturing lead time for your make items, right? Defining the structure that you want to build along with your engineering team, right? So these are the basic things that you work bottoms up, right? And at somewhere in the middle is when these two layers meet. And that is where collaboration happens. And that has been, the consistent challenge, right? Where do we meet? You were talking earlier, John, about different languages, right? You speak to a project manager, he's going to talk about WBS, activity IDs. You go talk to a materials manager, he's going to talk about, this PO is not pegged to your demand, right? And it creates a lot of confusion. So some of the things that we are trying to do is we are trying to put a framework over the project execution framework. And this is as simple as building a small app, right? For folks to understand, what is the reason or what are the delays on the project and what is driving that delay. So for a project number, for a given sales order under the project number, we can identify what PO or what work order is causing the delay. So no more excuses in terms of my activity ID does not match with your pegging details, right? So that communication we are trying, or those kind of issues we're trying to iron them out. The second level of communication or collaboration is with our customers. So we are piloting a new tool called RealTrack. Then this is where it gets very challenging, right? We are now, for our customers like Chevron, Exxon, we just met with Chevron last week. We are actually giving them a tool that will give them insights into our project plan. That ways, one of our key beliefs in GE is customer is everything, is the center of everything, right? So if you're showing a plan to your customer, it puts the added pressure on us to make sure that the plan stays healthy. So that's what we're trying to do, and it's not at live, but it should be live in the next few weeks here.
Thank you. So with that, what I'd like to do is open up questions to the audience. Are there any questions that you'd like to? Question right here.
I'll talk loud.
Okay.
So more data availability, more reports, all of these things doesn't necessarily mean better communication, right? I mean, if you get 200 emails a day, somebody says, I sent you an email about it doesn't necessarily mean you saw it. So IT systems are really good at collecting the data and reporting the data and so forth, but how do we turn that into a simple, effective communication tool? How do we weed through all the noise?
I can take that. It's key for us to have one source of truth. You're absolutely right. And when we started this, we did it in small pockets. And what we quickly realized is the data that we are pulling into our systems, we had a different data warehouse that someone else would be looking at, right? And we started having conflicting IT systems, because the sources of truth were different. So the first effort that we are putting on is consolidating the sources of truth. So that way everyone looks at the same set of data. The second thing is communication, right? We're trying to stay as much. It's almost impossible to get away from email communication. It's so easy to send an email and get an update. But what we're trying to do is in a meeting, when we're trying to have a project meeting, we're trying to reduce the use of PowerPoint slides or emails or Word documents. We're trying to put the project plan on the table for all of us to look at it. What that is helping us with is, it is the data being pulled from the source of truth. So, you can't say that, well, I sent an email 3 days ago. Well, even if you did, the action was not taken, the PO is still delayed, so we need to push sourcing to get the material, or push our supplier to get the material in. So I'm seeing a refinement in terms of the dialogue that happens around project issues and challenges. But again, the path is still long. I mean, there are still pockets where we get those emails and the issues that you have mentioned, they are still there in the organization. But my recommendation is, for any project status meeting, just look at the project plan that you have, and it could be a Microsoft project plan, it could be an Oracle Primavera, like we do it, but just focus on the plan and make sure that the plan gets updated, right? And even if the plan is not updated, we put in an owner for each of the updates, right? So we know who has not updated the plan. So that would be one recommendation. I don't know if that helps.
I'll just tell you, in the customers we work with, the thing it's an automation integration, and tying, especially across platforms. That's the big, the opportunity area, and I think that's where we're seeing the biggest change currently today. Any other questions?
Yeah. This is Walter. Oh, this is loud. Huh? Yeah, I agree with you that digitality and visual standard processes are key for collaboration. I totally agree with you, but I have a question around what's the role of the leadership, or what's the behavior of the leadership to drive a collaboration and that alignment that's important. For upstream and downstream, we don't only care about the capital project side, really. It is building it right, on schedule, on time, but also operating it. That's eventually what is going to bring money to the business. So that whole communication alignment, so that all is seamless from the leadership perspective.
Yeah, I can start to respond to that. We have invested a significant amount of time to standardize our processes on a global basis. We come, as many other companies, from different regional aspects. We have grown through acquisitions, and we had different operational models around the globe. And we moved actually away from that more to a functional model. And of course, in that transformation, you need your leadership engaged. And we launched what we call a quality transformation, where we really focus on putting quality as an absolute into the organization, and we follow the principles of safety, quality, delivery, and cost. But of course, there was a mix-up of priorities along that journey. Is safety more important than quality, or is delivery more important than safety and quality? And the cost element, quite interestingly, was secondary. But now the cost element is almost, the topic in the industry. But we shall not forget that it always has to happen along the lines of safety, quality, delivery, and cost, and it's all interrelated. So So leadership is very important. Standardizing your global processes and standardizing your execution is business critical. When we talk about standardization, it's beyond standardizing a product. It's beyond standardizing a material. It is standardizing a culture. It is standardizing an execution process. And leadership plays a pivotal role in that. And it comes with challenges, because sometimes, they haven't bought fully into it. They probably don't fully understand it themselves. They are a little bit fearful of the consequences. You're right. I mean, leadership is very critical in that transformation, and they need to stay on course, and they need to send the right message to the organization. And at the beginning, just to give you a little bit of perspective, when they received a phone call from a client, a CIO or a CFO or whatever it is, COO, they were immediately reacting to that and basically worked around the entire organization in order to mitigate that issue. That culture has changed. One, we're getting less of these telephone calls, gladly. Secondly, they know how they need to behave. They know that there is an organization, they know there is a process, they know that there is a responsible person that has the best answer and is able to respond to that answer. So leadership, very important.
I think we have time for one more question.
I'm accustomed to having capital project people very focused on cost and schedule and budget and getting the damn asset built. But there is a life after that when you have to run the facility. Where do you see I guess what's your been experience in your capital projects at the owner-operator actually being able to successfully bring the plant online and have a flawless operation? Is that relatively common, relatively uncommon? Does it vary? How well is I guess maybe the bottom line is, how ready is the customer, the owner-operator, to take on this often billion-dollar asset and actually run the place? Because that's when the capital project people aren't really interested anymore. Once you turn the plant over, the owner has to do it. So they raise this baby, now somebody has to do the diapers. And I just wonder what your experience is in that.
I'll go first. It's been one of our key focus areas in the last, I would say, about 4 to 5 years. Earlier, you were absolutely right. I mean, project's done, everyone goes home, customer deal with it. What we have started realizing is there is a lot of service calories that we call it. Service calories is basically after delivery, if you stick along with the customer to make sure that the project really succeeds for him. You can start harnessing a lot of valuable information from that experience. A good example of it is what we're doing within GE right now is, as the project gets delivered, we are harvesting what we call as the IB information, install base. Some of these machines, and not all of them, but some of our high-tech equipments are coming now with some sensors, so we are able to read the effectivity of the solution that the customer is actually using. In addition to that, we used to have situations where the customers would come back saying, hey, you delivered this, now there is an issue, I don't know whom to call, right? My rig is down, I'm losing millions. So we are now working with our customers. We've given them, to what Thomas was saying earlier, right? We've given them a mechanism where, and this is done with only select customers as of now, but they can actually log in a case for any after project installation issue. And if it's a severe issue, if it's hampering their production, so to say, if it's a production down scenario, that case goes directly to the CEO of our sub-business. And then, to your point, leadership, that's when the leadership comes in with the hammer saying, hey, we delivered this project, it's our job now to guarantee that the customers are successful with it. So the culture is changing. Are we there yet 100%? I don't think so. But we've realized the value of sticking with the customer through this phase. And I mean, personally, what has been a revelation for me, and coming from healthcare, I classify healthcare as a very much contractual-based business model. Versus oil and gas, it's heavily relationship-based business model. So you necessarily don't want to piss off your customer by delivering an equipment and walking away, and they are not able to use it effectively. So that's how we are looking at it. That's how we're approaching it.
So we'll probably have to, I'm getting the hook over here. So first off, I want to thank Abhijit and Thomas for their participation and for all the great questions. So thank you.